Well, the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee have unearthed enough evidence, in my opinion, to justify about 3 or 4 articles of impeachment against the president.
I'm Nick Gillespie for Reason, and I am sitting down on the studio floor of Liberty File with Judge Napolitano, with Judge Andrew Napolitano. He's the senior judicial analyst at Fox News Channel. Judge, we're going to talk about impeachment and the Constitution.
Pleasure, Nick. You look very good in my chair. I don't know how well I look in the guest chair.
Okay, well, and now the hunter has become the hunted.
Oh, only you could put it that way.
You are one of the most outspoken libertarian defenders of constitutional government, of limiting the executive branch as well as the government altogether. What is the case that Donald Trump has committed impeachable offenses?
Well, the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee have unearthed enough evidence, in my opinion, to justify about 3 or 4 articles of impeachment against the president. We have to start this conversation by underscoring the fact that impeachment is not legal. It is political.
Right.
Its only constitutional base is treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. One of their counts is bribery, which I'll explain in a minute.
Okay. But that other high crimes and misdemeanors, doesn't that kind of open it up to
Yes.
what I know you've quoted him at length, but Gerald Ford, as a congressman in the early 70s,
Yes.
before he was vice president, before Watergate,
Yes.
he said, an impeachable offense is whatever the House decides on a given day.
And he made that statement based on a phrase in the Constitution, which says the House of Representatives shall have the sole, S-O-L-E, power of impeachment. And another phrase in the Constitution which says each house shall write its own rules.
Right.
So those rules don't even have to be fair as long as they generate the support of the majority.
Right.
The rules under which the current House is operating were written in January 2015 when the Speaker was John Boehner and the majority was Republicans.
Okay. So that means the Republicans are going to be screaming bloody murder, that
About
these rules are completely illegitimate. Where the hell did Shifty Schiff come up with these and all of that?
Congressman Schiff, whether you like him or not, whether you agree with him or not, is following rules that the Republicans authored 4.5 years ago.
What are those 3 or 4 articles? Because when you go into impeachment, and I'm trying to channel this from 20 years ago,
right.
When Bill Clinton was impeached.
Now, wait a minute.
Okay.
You were a baby 20 years ago.
That is true, but I was precocious, Judge.
Right.
I was precocious.
Right. Here's what I think.
We had basic cable in the womb.
Right.
So.
Here's what I think the Democrats will want, Nick. Here's what I think they will advance. One is bribery. Mm-hmm. The allegation is, the technical definition of bribery is the failure to perform an official duty until a thing of value comes your way. And they will argue that the president's failure to disperse funds that the Congress ordered be dispersed until the recipient of the funds agreed to investigate a potential political
mm-hmm.
opponent is an act of bribery. That is enough, in my opinion, to make it over the threshold of impeachable offenses. I don't think it's enough to convict of bribery, but it's enough
mm-hmm.
to allege it for the purpose of impeachment. The second charge will be high crimes and misdemeanors, election law violation. The third crime will be obstruction of justice. The fourth will be interference with a witness. And the fifth may be lying under oath. Take that last one. There are reports based upon a letter that the General Counsel of the House of Representatives wrote to the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit mm-hmm. when, in seeking copies of the grand jury materials in the Mueller investigation and asked why, he responded, because we believe the president lied under oath and the Intelligence Committee, which is investigating mm-hmm. impeachment, needs this. The alleged lie under oath was the president's statement to Bob Mueller that he doesn't recall a conversation on the phone with Roger Stone over whether or not Stone had access to the WikiLeaks material. That's been established in the Stone trial, so now the Democrats are interested in pursuing it. So the other 2 articles of impeachment will be election law violation. The election laws, for better or for worse, I think this is a horrible law because it interferes with free speech, but it is the law. Asking a foreign government, the phrase in the statute is soliciting, mm-hmm. for assistance for a campaign is a criminal act, whether the foreign government provides what you ask for or not.
But wait, can't Trump just say, or I guess what I'm going to ask you is, what is the Republican response? Or sketch out the president's defense?
Okay,
Can he say, what are you talking about? I'm investigating, in 2017, Politico and a host of other publications said Ukraine was trying to influence the American election. In 2016, Trump is just saying, I'm trying to get to the bottom of this corruption.
That is his defense. I've actually looked in the camera and said, you would be better off acknowledging the facts, but arguing that none of this is impeachable, because you're going to lose on the facts. One of the reasons he used Rudy Giuliani as the emissary for this information is because of his and Rudy's belief in the attorney-client privilege, meaning Rudy could never be interrogated and forced to divulge what he said to the president said to him. Guess what? There's no attorney-client privilege in an impeachment proceeding. That's why Rudy, and I say it's absconded, that's why he didn't honor the subpoena that was served on him. The last article of impeachment that I believe they're contemplating is the same one with which they charged President Nixon and President Clinton, and that is obstruction of Congress by refusing to permit officials of the executive branch to testify and refusing to permit those officials to have access to their own documents. The most poignant example of which was earlier this week when Ambassador Sondland, Gordon Sondland, testified, they won't give me my own phone records and my own notes because the president has told them not to.
Right. Is that a legit, or is this also, obviously the branches of government are in tension with one another.
Right.
And is a lot of this, to go back to that idea, this is a political proceeding, not a legal one.
Right.
Is this just a flex by Congress to say, what, we have, particularly the House, we've hated Trump, we've wanted to unseat him from the beginning.
No question
and now
about that.
we can do it, and we don't, all we have to do is get a majority of members of Congress.
You blame that on James Madison, not on Adam Schiff. I mean, that's the Constitution. Yeah. That's the procedure that's set forth.
I like to think of him as Mr. Dolly Madison. That's the real legacy: is the sweets and ice cream. It's all delicious.
It's actually, it's actually three James Madisons, the same person, but three radical different thoughts. The third of which is the small government libertarian, but not the first two. But back to the Constitution. Because the House can write its own rules, and because those rules say that a committee has subpoena power, you don't need the authority of the full House, and because there are no defenses except those which come from the Constitution, the president cannot interfere with the investigation of himself without risking this charge.
Right.
So when Clinton said to Betty Curry, his secretary, don't tell them, and when Nixon said to Ehrlichman, Haldeman, and Dean, don't tell them, and some of them did, they were still charged with this because the obstruction doesn't have to succeed. It only, from the presidential perspective, it only has to be articulated. So this is at least the Democratic argument.
How do you feel about this in any other context, virtually, in any other kind of legal proceeding? And again, this is a political proceeding. It's not a legal one, but you would be on the side of saying, the police or the investigating force should be held to the strictest standard of behavior. And, the FBI, and you've talked about the FBI, will talk to you for hours so that you make misstatements, and then they can charge you with lying to the FBI or obstruction. Which
is why you should never talk to the FBI, even if you're in the right.
So, isn't something similar going on here? And does that risk taking, what is effectively a political dispute?
You're asking me if this is just from a moral perspective or if it's constitutional. It is absolutely constitutional. It is probably unjust from a moral perspective for the reasons you've articulated. The president gets no due process, but he's not entitled to due process under the Constitution until this gets to the Senate, if it gets there. And that's when there's a trial in the traditional sense, except that the jury is the members of the Senate.
So what is the essential difference? Impeachment, you only bring articles of impeachment if you think the president deserves to be removed from office, right?
Theoretically, yes.
if you're on the team that is pushing impeachment.
Well, listen, if you push impeachment without a national consensus behind it, you'll suffer at the polls.
Right.
I mean, the remedy for an inappropriate impeachment is not stonewalling. It's getting your opponents driven from office, as Bill Clinton succeeded in with all of his impeachment prosecutors except for one.
Who was the one who didn't?
Then
Lindsey Graham?
Congressman and now Senator Graham. Correct.
Yeah.
The others were all kicked out.
Right.
One of them works for another network and has the morning show, and the show rhymes with morning show. So I'm not using his name on that network.
Are you allowed to say? Can I say that
Well,
name?
sure,
Or
it's Joe
will the
Scarborough. I
lights
mean,
go
it was
dark?
Congressman Scarborough
Right.
at the time. Congressman Jim Rogan, who's now a Superior Court judge in California, and was defeated for re-election by Adam Schiff. So that was all connected.
Yet again, this is just kind of like, next we're going to be talking about an Oasis reunion and Snapple coming back. This is the 90s being redone, right?
Well,
it's nostalgia.
There's a lot of people who keep popping up in these events. So is an impeachment just from the moral perspective? Probably not.
Not in this case. I mean, in certain cases.
But is
would
it
you agree
constitutional?
Nixon, I mean, he resigned before he was officially impeached, but he should have been impeached, and he probably, almost certainly should have been removed from
Nixon
office.
is the extreme case, even though it was the cover-up of a 2-bit break-in.
Right.
Nixon's statement that which was made after he left office to David Frost, if the president does it, it's not illegal.
Right.
I mean, that statement shows an attitude about the presidency that the president can do no wrong.
Right. And now, do you think
Nixon's impeachment was led by Peter Rodino, for whom I was a page in the House of Representatives? Rodino's mind was absolutely made up before the first witness testified. And where did Rodino get all of his evidence from? A secret grand jury proceeding run by Leon Jaworski. Where did Henry Hyde get all of his evidence from? He was the chair of the Judiciary Committee when Clinton was impeached. A secret grand jury run by Ken Starr. So secrecy is often the birth of this material. Yeah. The politicians often decide ahead of time where it's going to go. They just have to make their case to their colleagues and to the public.
So do you think that you said that, Trump should be impeached? Should he be removed from office based on what you've seen now?
I can't imagine that he will be removed from office.
Because the Senate is run by the Republicans and you need 2/3 of the Senate.
Yes.
But that's just doing math. Do you think, in the interests of the country and not of making us feel good about each other, but has he overstepped the bounds that the executive branch should, be held to?
He hasn't presented a defense, and I don't know if he plans to. The evidence of his impeachable behavior at this point, in my view, is overwhelming. But being an ex-judge and being a lawyer, I have to withhold judgment until a defense is presented. Now, the defense would have to come out of the mouth, I would think, of people who've refused to testify. Vice President Pence, Secretary of State Pompeo, Acting Chief of Staff Mulvaney, and the president himself, although the president is teasing everybody by saying he might testify.
So far things are, however fractious they might be, they're proceeding along the way that the Constitution maps them out. Are we in a constitutional crisis, or when do we get to a constitutional crisis?
I don't think we're in a constitutional crisis. We would get to one if the president were removed from office and refused to leave. I mean, that would be a constitutional crisis. You could argue there's a mini constitutional crisis when the House demands something and the White House refuses to present it. That's why we have a judiciary. Now, neither side wants to go to the judiciary because both sides want this over with so they can get into the 2020 political season. So I don't think we're at that crisis level. We're at a clash, but not a crisis.
So that'll come if this goes to the judiciary and then one of the sides refuses to abide by what the court says.
Nixon famously refused to surrender the tapes. And it went to the Supreme Court. It's a unanimous opinion, United States versus Nixon, which ordered the tapes surrendered. Then he resigned, and we all know how that happened. So if the court were to order President Trump to surrender documents and he were to refuse, well, that would be a constitutional crisis. I happen to think if the court ordered something and the Supreme Court either didn't hear the appeal or affirmed that decision, I think he would comply because he would begin to lose his base if he thumbed his nose at the judiciary. I know he criticizes the judiciary. It says they're Obama judges and Bush judges and Trump judges. I don't think that washes in this environment.
How do you think more broadly, how is President Trump doing as a chief executive? Do you feel like he's furthering the interests of the country? Do you feel he is doing damage to, if not the law, but the traditions and customs of the executive branch? Because it does seem like, a lot of the criticism of Trump is less about the substance and it's more about the style. Is that a bad thing, or does that matter?
My column this morning at foxnews.com and elsewhere argues that no American president in the post-Woodrow Wilson era has stayed within the confines of the Constitution, and each president has more authority than his predecessors for the simple reason that Democratic Congresses give power to Democratic presidents, Republican Congresses, I can give you many examples of this, give power to Republican presidents, and that power stays in the presidency. So Donald Trump actually has more authority than Barack Obama did, who had more authority than George W. Bush did, etc.
What do you
Now,
think?
that type of authority to do things outside the confines of the Constitution, like use a drone to kill somebody in a foreign country, really rankles my libertarian values. That is far afield from the government that Madison, Dolly's husband, or Jimmy, however you want to refer to him, gave us.
So, how do you pull this back? How do you and obviously you've written in a number of books, but how do you pull
this many times? Can you pull it back, short of a revolution or short of secession? I'm not talking about the South seceding. I'm talking about, I'm sure if California wanted to leave and the Republicans ran Congress, even though the IRS would lose a lot of money, they'd basically say, go. It's going to take something like that to turn this around, because all the power keeps going in the same direction, away from individuals, away from municipalities, away from the states, and towards the federal government. I mean, I have argued that the federal government stays in power by an act of bribery. It bribes the states with cash. It bribes the rich with bailouts. It bribes the middle class with tax cuts. It bribes the poor with welfare. And as long as it can keep doing that bribing, it's going to stay in power. It doesn't matter which party is in power. The mindset is the same. The Donald Trump that criticized Barack Obama has killed more people with drones than Barack Obama did. The Barack Obama who criticized George W. Bush killed more people with drones than George W. Bush did. I could keep going on down to Wilson.
Would you agree, theoretically, that if a president should be impeached when they exceed the powers allotted to the executive branch in the Constitution, right?
Everybody after Wilson would have been impeached.
Right.
I think you have to add to that when there's a perception in the land, a strong consensus that this has happened. I don't believe that consensus exists today, which is why Mrs. Pelosi and Congressman Schiff are on a risky venture, because they will have to confront the voters, whatever the outcome is.
Is part of you proud as an Italian American that, Nancy Pelosi, Rudy Giuliani, that this is, it's a lot of Italian Americans in the mixer.
Now, can I reveal to the people watching us now that even though your name is Gillespie, you are half Italian?
I am, the better half is Italian. Right?
Let's not go there, Nick.
Yeah. But what short of revolution? I mean, you write books, you appear on TV, you write columns. Talk about, is part of this an education process to say, look, we're going to get the government. I mean, we can make changes at the polls, right?
Yes,
what are the ways?
I mean, I have argued that it doesn't matter, unless a Ron Paul or Bernie Sanders, let's take two people that are really different, were president. I don't think it matters, because they are basically bound by the laws, tempted by all the authority the president has, reinforced by generations of exceeding the bounds of the Constitution. It would take a real serious ideologue. In Bernie's case, somebody that wants to destroy the capitalist system and redistribute wealth. In Ron Paul's case, somebody who wants to shrink the government down to the size it was when little Jimmy Madison wrote the Constitution. Short of that, the people that are always in power, now called the deep state, the bankers, the diplomats, the bureaucrats, will still have those great levers of power, no matter who is in the White House, short of these extremes.
So you're a systems man. I mean, so even if Bernie Sanders or Ron Paul were elected, they would be more expansive than they were going in.
No, I don't think so. I can't speak for Bernie Sanders, but I know Ron Paul very well. He is absolutely faithful to the small government principles that government is best which governs least. I don't think he would, this is prediction now.
Yeah.
I mean, he's in his 80s. I don't think if he became president, he would be tempted to be a president like George W. Bush or Donald Trump.
Is there something in the 21st century that is accelerating the expansion of federal power? Because, the one thing you can say about like Bush, Obama, and now Trump, and I personally, I don't think Trump has been as expansive in most ways as Bush or Obama, partly because he doesn't articulate any rationale, hidden or otherwise, for what he's doing.
Well, let me tell you what he's done, hidden or otherwise, which is to borrow $1 trillion a year.
Right.
And that, of course, will one day consume us when there's so much debt that it can't be paid. People will either stop working or stop paying taxes, and then the government collapses. So the acceleration of debt in the 21st century will be the ruination of the federal government.
And this is not the first time that a mighty, vast country or empire falters, not because of external enemies, but because of debt, essentially.
Correct. It also falters like the Roman Republic collapsed when they gave dictatorial powers to a general named Pompey to fight off pirates that were destroying it. And he fought off the pirates and won the wars and kept all that power.
Right.
And a generation later, there was no republic. There was a dictatorship.
Do you think that happened with the Patriot Act? And this, I guess, is another question for you. As we're talking about, all eyes are focused on impeachment. Various parts of the Patriot Act are being, lengthened again or renewed again. Is this all a distraction ultimately from what really matters, which are the, actual limitations on the ability of the federal government to spy on people, to extract money, to extract compliance?
I don't think the federal government recognizes its own limits, and the courts have looked the other way. I mean, my problem with Justice, then Judge Kavanaugh, was this. I'm holding up my iPhone. What's in here? Personal, intimate, political, legal, medical. In his world, you don't need a search warrant to get in there. The government can just go in there. Where does that come from? The Patriot Act, the most unpatriotic, abominable piece of legislation in history since the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1796.
But do you see any, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, people were talking about politicians like Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, Justin Amash in particular, as a kind of vanguard of a libertarian. They were all small L libertarian. They were all in the Republican Party. Amash, obviously now an independent. What happened to that kind of boomlet of interest in people who were constitutionally driven and were talking about restricting federal power? What's going on with that?
I mean, Justin Amash and Thomas Massie are faithful to small government principles. Senator Paul has seen fit to work with the White House in order to achieve certain goals. I'm trying to be charitable here. Let's just say my voting record would be far closer to Congressman Amash and Congressman Massie than to Senator Paul. But I understand what it's like being a Republican in the majority in the Senate today. The other senator from your state is the majority leader. It'd be very difficult not to play ball. And he does stay faithful
what
on
specifically
certain
has Rand Paul, again, other than kind of certain statements of support, what has he done that you think contravenes a kind of, his articulated small government
I would have
principles?
to look at his voting record, but there are many, many issues in the Senate where the Republicans vote as one voice.
Right.
And there should be a small government dissent.
Right.
Example, Justice Kavanaugh. This is a perfect example for the small government Republicans in the Senate, which as far as I know is just two of them, Mike Lee and Rand Paul, to make a stand for the Fourth Amendment. Instead, they voted to confirm somebody who will ratify legislation that permits them to be spied on. Justice Scalia told me that the court was being spied on under the Patriot Act.
So you are not a Kavanaugh fan at all. You think he's
I'm not
he's
picking on
the
him
mistake.
personally,
Yeah.
but I'm not a fan of any big government person. Justice Gorsuch is a different story.
Right.
I know Justice Gorsuch's brain. We studied jurisprudence under the same person, a generation apart, but the same
Who
person.
is that? Ginsburg?
No, John Finnis, Finnis, who's an Australian professor who taught at Oxford when Gorsuch was there and at Notre Dame when I was there. Finnis
Are we
teaches.
outsourcing the Constitution to Australians? No wonder we're in such.
Finnis teaches that our rights come from our humanity, natural law theory.
Right.
Justice Thomas accepts natural law theory. Nobody else on the bench does. In the absence of natural law theory, that our rights come from our humanity, as Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, then our rights come from the government, and the government that gives them can take them away. That's the view that almost everybody in the government accepts. That is absolutely contrary to first principles that Rand Paul should be fighting for.
Here's a question. We're taping this on, a Thursday, I guess, and there was a Democratic debate the night before. The Democratic candidates, do any of them strike you as particularly good in terms of being bound by the Constitution, being informed by constitutional limits on federal power?
Absolutely not.
Having said that, there does seem to be a number of developments that are very consistent with a libertarian worldview. We're talking about things like winding down many aspects, if not the whole shebang, of the war on drugs. Criminal justice reform, which Donald Trump has signed, has moved through the government. That we seem to be, on some level, retreating from the world stage as a military power.
All those things I support.
Yeah,
unfortunately, they're being done in baby steps. But maybe that's the political reality. Even the president has to do them in baby steps. But I support, as you know, withdrawing from the world stage. I certainly support the right of adults to put whatever they want in their own bodies. So those things are in the right direction. That has happened by the federal government looking the other way, while state governments have permitted the use of certain recreational drugs. I think marijuana is the only one.
Right. Yeah, and there's a couple of budding cities and whatnot doing things like magic mushrooms and whatnot, but that's still down the road to come. Are you a drug user at all? Have you ever smoked weed?
No.
No?
No to both questions. I'm terrified. I'm a health fanatic.
Really?
I am terrified of putting.
So you're
the
like
wrong
Charles
thing in my
Atlas,
body.
right? To keep it in the
Well, Charles
Goomba tradition.
Atlas's real name, as you know, was
Yes.
Angelo Siciliano.
I absolutely know that. Yes.
Very few people who know that. I am not like Charles
You're
Atlas.
doing that dynamic tension,
but
7 seconds a day.
I do work out quite regularly.
Are you optimistic? Or let me put it this way, because I think I know the answer to that. But given the way the kind of decline tale that you've told, that since Madison, things have just been going to pot ever since. But are you optimistic about the future of the country?
I am not.
Okay.
I am not. I think power will continue to grow. The federal government will continue to absorb debt. It will continue to bribe people to stay in existence, and eventually will fall like an overripe apple.
But do you feel like you're freer now to live your life however you want today as opposed to 30 years ago or 40 years ago? And when I ask that, not based on the size of government, but by the whole offering of what you can do with your life, and that includes technology, it includes the decline of certain types of cultural gatekeepers that said no, or social, as well as legal things.
The decline of cultural gatekeepers about certain lifestyles obviously is liberating, but the same technology, which lets me put the works of Thomas Aquinas in my pocket, also lets the government follow me wherever I go and record whatever conversation I have with Gillespie or whoever I'm talking to. The Constitution be damned. Damned. That's the federal attitude about it. They could get rid of the Patriot Act. The NSA would still be spying on us. They could spy on the president, and he would still authorize spying on everybody else.
You know what? On that upbeat note, I think we're going to end it. We've been talking with Judge Andrew Napolitano. He's the senior judicial analyst at Fox News Channel, author of many books, including several bestsellers, a regular contributor to FoxNews.com. Judge, thanks for talking.
You're welcome.
For a Reason, I'm Nick Gillespie.